Hey guys, welcome back. I am planting my tomatoes today, so I thought I'd bring you along while I'm doing that, show you how I plant my tomatoes. So I'm going to be planting in these beds like what you see behind me. These are 3 foot by 5 foot raised beds, and I'm going to be planting about 50-ish tomatoes today. So I'll take you along with me and show you how I plant these. I'm going to plant them all basically the same. So the first ones that I'm going to be planting are my favorite tomato, Cherokee Purple. I love the flavor of these. It was my grandpa's favorite tomato to grow, so it's really nice to be able to grow something sort of like in honor of him. So we're going to be getting these in the ground. The first tip I'm going to give you for planting your tomatoes is, if you look closely there, you see all of those tomato hairs. Every one of these tomato hairs has the potential to turn into a root. Tomatoes are special in the fact that they can grow roots from anywhere on their stems. Not all plants do this, so this is not going to work with just any plant that you do. This is specific to tomatoes. So when I go to plant these, I'm actually going to plant them in the soil up to this first set of leaves right here. And that's going to allow all of this part of the stem to become a root system. And that is going to help the tomatoes, the tomato plant, establish a nicer root system, which in return is going to help it gather more nutrients out of the soil and water and make an overall healthier, sturdier plant. Okay, so these are going in this bed right here behind me. As you can tell, I have some peas that are trellising here along this trellis. Those will come out in a week or two, and then that'll be about when these are getting tall enough to need trellised, and I will then trellis these tomatoes to that. When you're growing indeterminate varieties, which all of these heirloom plants that I'm growing are going to be indeterminate. Indeterminate means that they are going to grow. They are going to grow and grow and grow. They don't have a set height that they're just going to stop growing at, and a set time that they're going to stop producing. So these indeterminates will continue to grow and continue to produce all throughout their season, whereas a determinate variety would be, it'll only grow, it usually tells you on the package, like to 3 feet, 5 feet. If it's a like a miniature little plant, then it may only grow to be like 18 inches or 2 feet tall, depending on what it says, and then it will produce all of its fruit at once, and then it'll be over with and done. These will not be like that. These will continue to grow taller. My tomato plants usually get 6 to 8 feet tall, at least. I've had them get 9 foot, and they would have kept going if they'd had something to trellis on. So they get very tall, and they will just continue to produce fruit all throughout the season. So they're going to need some trellising. That's why I'm using this trellising behind me. If you don't have that, you can use, you can stake them. You could use tomato cages. You could use the rope method, like where you weave rope or twine back and forth between them to hold them together. I have not had great success doing that. It does work okay, but I prefer to just attach them to a trellis personally myself. And then for this size bed, this is a 3 by 6 bed. I'm going to plant 4 on each side of this trellis, so I'll be planting 8 total in each one of these beds, which is definitely a lot closer together than what, like, if you look at a planting guide, what it might recommend. So I've realized that when I'm planting in raised beds, as long as I prune my tomatoes pretty heavily by taking off any extra unneeded foliage, any extra, I'm able to grow a lot more tomatoes in a lot more compacted space. So when you see planting guides on either a seed package or on a plant when you buy it, that has been a standardized planting method for market growers who just till up long gardens. They plant in straight rows, and they need to give their plants plenty of space in between. They may give them 4 to 6 feet between each tomato plant to make sure there's plenty of airflow and to cut down on disease. But with me being a small home gardener, I don't have to worry about all that as much, because I want to stay on top of these, prune them well, make sure there's plenty of airflow at all times, and watch out for pest and disease and take care of that as needed by removing leaves or pest, so that doesn't become a problem. If you were gardening acres, that would become a lot bigger issue, and that's when you'd really need to spread those tomato plants out more. So those are a few of my tomato planting tips. So I'm going to show you how easy it is to just get these guys in the ground really quick. And let's get this over with. It's a nice warm day. It is very hot out here, so let's get started. Okay guys, so here are my tomato plants. I'll just sort of give you a little, so you can tell they're about a foot apart, each one of these are. And that's where they're going to go in the ground. So let's get these little guys planted, okay? Let's see if we can get here. Let's do this one so I'm not shading out, okay? Alright, so I'm just going to start by digging a hole, which would be much easier if I actually had my trowel, but of course the one time I need it I cannot find it anywhere. I do not know. Oh, look at all the little worms in there. That's a great sign. Alright, we're going to take this guy out to just plop him in here, and then I'm going to plant him up to that first set of leaves, and then I'm going to push down. I don't want to totally compact the soil, but I do need it to be tight because we don't want to leave a bunch of air around our roots that could kill your plant. So we want to make sure that it's nice and solid and in there, and there you have it. It's that simple, okay? Okay, got I just used a different garden tool so I can get that hole dug deep enough and get this over with a lot faster. And we're just going to cover him up again with our soil around him. Push the dirt up and two around that first set of leaves there. It actually makes the tomato plant look a lot smaller than it did when it was in the container, but these will take off and grow really fast. Okay, so let's talk about when you get a plant. Maybe you were lucky enough to buy a plant that looks like this. That is actually can be separated into two separate plants. So when you take it out of the container, let me just lay it down here on the ground so I can show you. When you take it out from the container, you just want to gently break those two apart. This will become a plant, and that will also become a plant. And then, so that way you can get a little more bang for your buck there if you were lucky enough to have bought, and that's any plant, whether it be cucumbers or a squash. If there's more than one main stem coming off of it like that, there's probably means that there was more than one seed ground. It's more than one plant. They're actually going to do better if you separate them out like this, because they're not going to be competing for space. And I can actually take this little guy. It's sort of small anyway. I'll probably put him back in a pot and let him grow a little bit more, or give him away. Okay, so one of the next little tips that I would like to give you for this is planting tomatoes or any crop, is that when you're planting them, if you're going to be planting several plants in your garden, that is a pretty good idea to space some of them out and put some separation between them by separating them with a different crop that is from a totally different plant family. And that way, if you do happen to have a lot of disease or pest pressure that happens like in one raised bed, for instance, since that's what I'm using here is raised beds, it's not going to spread as quickly from bed to bed or from plant to plant. So the way I do this for my garden, and as you can see here I have lots of raised beds, is that I do tomatoes, I skip one, and then I do tomatoes again. I also do this, like I'll do sweet potatoes in one, skip and do a different crop in the next bed, and then do sweet potatoes again. And that way I'm cutting down on the chances of my pests being able to just hop from plant to plant to plant and bed to bed. And that way if I lose one bed, I'm just losing one part of my crop and not the entire thing. So like I'm planting 8 tomatoes here. That has broccolis and cabbages, which is a totally different family of my brassicas. And then the next one I will have tomatoes again, to put a little separation here to help combat any pest issues, especially that I may have, but disease issues as well, like blight. So even if you're not planting in a raised bed, any type of garden space that you would have, I would recommend that maybe you don't plant all of your squash or all of your zucchini or all of your beans in one spot, that you would stagger your rows and do like a row of squash, and then a row of beans, a row of tomatoes, and then another row of squash, another row of beans, another row of tomatoes. This could save you from just totally having one thing totally wiped out. It's also like if a deer gets in and starts nibbling on something, maybe they won't make it to the interior part of your garden, and it could save at least some of your crop. So there's just a lot of benefits to moving your crops around and not growing them all in one space. So that is just what I've done, and it does significantly cut down, especially on pest pressure. Trying to grow organically where I'm not really using any pesticides, this has been one of the simplest ways I have come up with to cut down on losses from pest pressure in crops, because you have little bugs that come in here, they're crawling around, they're looking, they're usually low, they're crawling, they find something, they start eating on it. Well, they found a convenient source of food. As long as there's more of that food, they will just keep going plant to plant to plant. And bug life cycles are usually pretty short, so chances are they're going to just set up shop in that one area and demolish everything in its path, as long as it has free access to continue to hop plant to plant. By moving my next part of that crop down several beds, the likelihood of that bug making its way down a couple of beds before its life cycle ends is greatly diminished. So yeah, definitely, it's not only a tip for planting tomatoes, but just a tip in general that will really help cut down on pest and disease. So another little tip I'm going to give you is don't throw away your plant markers. Leave those in your plants for a little while, because you will think that you will remember where everything is, but as your garden continues to fill up, it can be really easy to forget where you planted what. Alright, so another tip that I'm going to give you, and it goes along with spreading out your crops like I talked about just a moment ago, but another good reason to do that is if you are planting like heirloom plants and you would like to seed save, they can cross-pollinate if your plants are close together. Like me planting all my different types of tomatoes in this one garden space, there is a chance that there's going to be some cross-pollination. There probably will be a little bit, but that's okay. Still going to be a great tasting plant. But if this is something you're really wanting to focus on, you want to try to plant each variety of your heirloom or open pollinated plants as far away from each other as possible to reduce the chances that they are going to get cross-pollinated with a different variety, okay? For tomatoes are, once these are established and they're starting to grow, it is really recommended that you water your tomatoes, bottom water them. That means not watering them, like not spraying the entire plant like from up high like this, but just maybe turning your hose way down low or using a soaker hose, and only getting right down, like right at the soil level, like way down here, and only watering way low. And this is for all plants, not getting their upper leaves wet. That can reduce a lot of issues that could arise in your garden. There's really no reason to wet the upper leaves. We're just trying to get water down to the roots, okay? And so this is also going to help conserve a little bit of water if you were able to water down low. And my last watering tip for tomatoes is that when it is time to harvest your tomatoes, that you do not harvest tomatoes right after watering them, because that you would actually harvest any tomatoes that are ripe before you water them, and that way they don't crack. So after you water, tomatoes have a very high water content. Once you water them, those tomatoes, they're going to swell up with water, and that goes cracking, and it's also going to dilute the flavor. So a lot of people will say that they don't like the flavor of a certain variety. That could be because you're harvesting right after there's been a lot of rain, or you've watered them a lot, and it's diluting the flavor, making it very watery. Maybe if you don't like the taste of tomatoes, this might be a good thing for you. But overall, the best time to harvest your tomatoes is before there's a lot of water being put on them, okay? So the flavor is going to be more intense, and you're going to be less likely to have those split. So those are some of my just fast tomato growing tips. I have a video from maybe 2 years ago on my homemade tomato fertilizer that I like to come along and fertilize these with several times. I usually fertilize them with it right after I plant them, right when they're putting on blooms, and then after my first harvest, I make my own fertilizer using Epsom salt. I use grass clippings, I use compost from our chicken and chicken manure, and wood ash from our from whenever we have fires, even like brush fires. I save that ash and add that to it. So yeah, it's super cheap, super simple fertilizer. Fertilizer is so expensive right now, so anything you do to save money is always nice, right? And this is almost everything you're probably gonna have at home. But that is just a few of my tomato growing tips for you to get them started and get them in the ground. Lastly, I didn't talk about this when I was first putting them in the ground, but you want to make sure that your soil is nice and warm before you plant your tomatoes. It could stunt their growth if it's not warm enough out. Here in Zone 7, I'm in East Tennessee, it is very warm out today, 88 degrees again. So it is definitely tomato planting weather. But if you live in a little bit cooler zone, you want to make sure that there's no chance that you're going to have a frost, that is all past, and that your soil is nice and warm, and you're going to have plenty of warm sunny days to help your plants get off to a good start. So I've got a lot more tomatoes to plant, like 40 more to go. So I'm going to get off here, get back to planting, and I'll see you next time. Thanks for hanging out with me.